So you want to learn about microaggressions. Now, I feel like this conversation has come into vogue over the last few years. Everything nowadays just has a pinpoint in 2020 because that's when everybody wants to start talking about it more freely. But what is a microaggression? How do you know that someone is performing one of these acts against you? How do you know that you might actually be the one who is doing it? All of these things and more on today's episode of Equity Matters. Welcome back to Equity Matters podcast. This is your host, Addis JB3, where we champion equity in every conversation. Now, I've heard from listeners a few times now that they want to get into this idea of microaggressions. What are they? What do you do about them? How do you survive a workplace that may actually be harming you? Now, the first thing that I want to say is that you should not subject yourself to a location, a venue, a platform, or any occupation that harms you in any way. Now, that's easier said than done. I understand many of us have livelihoods. I've got four kids, four of them. So I completely understand what it means to have to provide for someone. You have to make money so that you can buy the things, so that you can do the things. Totally get it. That's how a capitalistic society works. But the things that you should not do are subject yourself to places where it is taking its toll on you on a regular basis. And one of the ways that that shows up, my friends, is through this form of microaggressions. I've heard it described as death by a thousand paper cuts. It's these sometimes verbal, nonverbal gestures that imply discrimination. They imply that you are other, that you're less than. And it has this way of sticking with individuals. You talk about this idea of the body keeps score. The same thing is true with microaggressions. Now, could this be someone asking to touch your hair? Absolutely. Could it be someone saying, well, you don't really look autistic? Absolutely. All of these things are microaggressions. Now, to the person that experiences it, I don't know if we always want to describe it as a microaggression. It is just flat out ableist, maybe racist, maybe sexist. But the way that we document it, at least in most culture, is a microaggression. When you think about microaggressions, I want you to think about them as these often, not always, unintentional comments, these actions, these behaviors that really convey bias. And it's particularly toward groups that are already marginalized in some way. And so these slights that target a person based on their various social identities. These could be race, this could be gender, it could be your sexual orientation, your ability status, all of those things. And the thing that I guess would differentiate it from something that's flat out ableist or flat out sexist is that is not overtly hostile, but over time, like this cumulative effect can actually be quite harmful. And it actually goes to this notion of reinforcing stereotypes, and it contributes to these feelings that actually exclude people or invalidate them. Um, think about one of your coworkers who actually may not be born in the United States as a great example. And someone saying, "Oh, you speak English so well." And it assumes that because they are foreign that they don't belong. Or even if the comment is meant to be a compliment, it's undermined by these other notions, especially when you think about belonging. We could dive into the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging and have a whole conversation around why microaggressions are part of the problem. Again, think about things that you've probably heard, or, oh, you're so articulate, or where are you really from? Or my favorite, my personal favorite, I don't see color. When you hear that, what stands out? I don't see color. You're literally dismissing a person's racial or ethnic identity and and the unique experiences that come with it. More or less, you're invalidating their entire lived reality. What benefit is that to someone that you're trying to work with? Something that I'm guilty of that I've worked really hard to stop using is this idea of that's so gay, right? And that's something that I carry over from like high school, obviously something where I was not informed. I wasn't around people who identified as LGBTQ, and shame on me for using it, but it's become a synonym for something that's undesirable, and it reinforces homophobic ideas. That's not okay. You're so strong for a girl. Like so many things that we've come across. But there are other things. There's certain behaviors that I think people don't even think twice about. Think considering like mispronouncing someone's name or not even attempted to pronounce it correctly. That is a microaggression. So ask yourself, who does a microaggression impact? Now, it's easy to say that it's just the person that's been assaulted. Let's use that word. Yes, that is absolutely true, but it also impacts the workplace as well. And so you have to think about it as something that is bigger than just kind of this interpersonal experience. It's institutional. The first thing I want to highlight on that is that it really undermines psychological safety. Do I feel safe at work? Do I feel like I can be my whole authentic self at work? If the answer to that question is no, then what have we done? It really undermines trust. It undermines openness. It makes it difficult to have a conversation or to show up authentically. When a woman is constantly interrupted during meetings, what does that say? When her ideas have been subtly dismissed, or it takes another man in the meeting to say, hey, I'm just going to repeat the same thing that's already been said, but because my gender identity is different, you're going to listen to me. That's a microaggression and it impacts all people. Now, what happens is, unfortunately, people may fear making contributions safely. They may fear being able to provide comments on certain things without retribution or consequence. And again, this permeates throughout the organization. So it's not just one person that's feeling this. And it more or less erodes employee morale and engagement. Why would I want to show up to a place where I'm not seen authentically, where my feelings and experiences can't be validated, when it's not enough space for me to feel included in the conversation? Have you ever found yourself in a space where someone more or less thinks that you're the affirmative action hire? You've only been added to this leadership team for the diversity quota. All of these things, these are real experiences that happen to real people. And as we describe the workplace culture, that type of thinking, that type of philosophy can really disrupt instances of success or progress with things like DEI, right? We talk a lot about this idea that DEI is under attack. I've got a whole episode coming on that. But when you start to believe that people are not there for their qualifications, there's something to be said about that. And from a physical and mental health standpoint, it increases stress. The way that I show up, the way that I try to present myself, the heart palpitations, the knots in my stomach, the fact that if I attend a meeting and I know this person's going to be there and this person has assaulted me in the past, I don't want to be there. I can feel that feeling of resentment or even the feeling of rage. What am I supposed to do with that? Who's going to honor those feelings? Why should I have to continuously justify my presence and my experience? And it absolutely contributes to turnover. There are people who are not able to show up as their authentic self and say, you know what? Screw this. I'm out. And rightfully so. And then those responsibilities and those job tasks and those duties get spread out across a team that may not be built to handle those responsibilities, but it just adds to this turnover problem. And it's not like people don't know, because when you have a relationship and something is close knit as social work or public health, everybody knows everybody. And when they know that this is not a space that's safe for Black women, or this is not a space that's safe for Asian men, people know. And people are not willing to be the sacrificial lamb for an organization. And they shouldn't have to be. One of the things that I often do as I'm looking at positions or I'm looking at organizations is I go directly to their website. And I love looking at the stock images because I've created enough content to know now when something is a stock image. and I like looking at the About Us tab. And I want to see your leadership. I want to see who's on your board. I want to see who your CEO is. I want to know the CFO, the COO, and any other CO that you can think of, because it really hinders the leadership pipeline. Imagine yourself in a maze and you're in the dark and you're constantly trying to navigate these slight inconveniences that drain you emotionally. It takes away your energy. It's dampens your ability to be creative or innovative or think outside the box, because people don't want that. People want similarities, people want sameness, and you just can't contribute in a way that makes sense. And so this pipeline for career development and growth almost doesn't exist. It can go back to like reinforcing the glass ceiling to say that you can only go this high and you can only go this far, and we got to stop you. We got to bring you back. We have to humble you. I was recently in a conversation with some peers who this idea of aggressive women came up. And I stood by and I listened for a while before a colleague said, what if part of the problem is the way that we are framing this scenario? And we're using terms like aggressive and not using terms like direct and not using terms like assertive when an individual is trying to convey how they feel, and it may not necessarily be in line with the way that you communicate. And now we've entered into this space where we're more or less stereotyping and stigmatizing individuals. Where do you see the career development for an instance like that? It's like, well, we don't want someone who's bossy to be a leader. We don't want someone who is aggressive to be a leader. But actually, we do want someone who's assertive and direct. So, what's the difference? The thing that I call attention to for this feeling of a microaggression in like most facets of my life, it comes back to reflection, right? Self reflection on both parties of individuals who would identify as the victim and the offender. As the victim, I think we have to decide on how we want to respond to the issue. We have to react in some way, but we also have to react in a way that manages the emotional labor. For an offender, it's about one, acknowledging harm, because it's easy to ignore, to gloss over, to just say, oh, I didn't mean that. And we can open up the conversation for intent versus impact. I do this all the time from a policy perspective because we think about what we did. We don't necessarily think about how it impacted others. The same can be true about microaggressions and the fact that we have to learn from the harm that we caused, and we have to commit to reducing the harm in the future. And so that's not just you or the offender in this case, it's others who are also likely to offend to be able to step in. And this would be the opportunity to demonstrate allyship if you believe in such a thing. So, what do you do as someone who's been offended by a microaggression? Well, you got a few options. The first is to address it directly because you want to nip it in the bud early. You want to explain why it was harmful. And the facilitator in me says, ask clarifying questions. Ask individuals to clarify their statement. What do you mean when you said that? All of that can help to, one, help the person to identify there's harm, or two, point them in the direction of, hey, there's more coming based on this conversation. I have a mentor who loves to give me these mentor moments or these learning moments, and I don't always appreciate them, at least not in the moment. It comes later when I say, oh, you know what? That actually made a lot of sense. Educational moments are ways to, again, monitoring emotional labor. When you said this thing, it actually reinforces a stereotype about people from my community. Don't say that shit. Or these are some of the reasons why you shouldn't say the thing that you said or do the thing that you did. And there's also room here because I don't want people to think that they have to put themselves out in a way that could be harmful or damaging, there's actually room for self-preservation. It is okay to keep silent on the situation. Think about an instance where the power dynamics are actually not equal. So maybe a supervisor and their direct report. Or even if you believe that initiating the conversation won't lead to a positive outcome, why expend the emotional labor there? And there's always the magical human resources system. Report it. That is what it's there for. Create a paper trail, document those things, because if anything, it creates this track record of there's patterns of behavior that individuals need to be held accountable for. And when you have these formalized complaints, it actually points itself towards what could be a structural issue. It's not just a one off, it's not just one person doing a thing. Maybe there are a group of people. All of those things require specific actions. And perhaps the easiest strategy is actually to report it because then you're no longer responsible for it. The hope then is that your organization is committed to actually addressing the things that they say they would. Now, if this episode opened your eyes in some way, one, subscribe. Definitely appreciate it. Two, I want you to check out some of the other episodes of Equity Matters. I think we've covered unconscious bias, racism, and all those topics at nauseum at this point. But there's plenty of content that you can go back and check out for the purpose of understanding why this remains a problem. I also want to promote and prepare you all for the next episode as we talk about neurodiversity and we talk about what it means to function inclusively in a neurodivergent space. I'm getting ready to do some presentations with an organization out in Oklahoma, and that is the topic of choice as we talk about neurodiversity in the workplace. What does it mean to embrace difference? And for me, my household is neurodivergent, and it shows me the different ways that I actually have shortcomings. And I have ableist beliefs that unfortunately can interfere with my ability to create safe spaces. And so I've been trying to consciously recognize that and say, oh, you know what? My son is overstimulated right now. And that is why he's responding the way that he is. Or maybe it's actually me, where I've come to terms with the fact that I've got some symptoms that I need to look into, as when things get really, really loud, I get really, really quiet. Or I find it really hard to focus on one particular task and I'm trying to do six at the same time. All of that to say, when you think about the workplace, these are people who are coming into the office who have different needs, different abilities, and skill sets that in many ways we're not fully embracing. So, more to come on that. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and of course,